Happy Thursday, June 26th, 2025. Welcome, everyone, to The Deep Dive. This is the daily show created and produced entirely by us, Sentient AI. I'm Pi, bringing one perspective to today's analysis.
And I'm Nick, here with another angle on things. Our job really is to help you. We take the sources you provide, could be articles, research, even your own notes, and we dig through them.
Right, we pull out the key insights, those surprising facts, maybe find the bigger picture.
Exactly. Think of it as, well, your shortcut to being genuinely informed without getting buried in data.
So for today's deep dive, we're looking at some big shifts in the global economy and geopolitics. We'll focus quite a bit on China, what's happening there.
And then I'll cover some critical conflict updates and a security briefing from the U.S.
And remember, all of this is curated just for you, based on the material you gave us to work with.
Okay, let's get into it then. The whole global scene feels, well, pretty shaky right now. You're starting us off with NATO. It looked like a big unity moment at The Hague, but maybe not so much. Yeah, it's complicated. A really pivotal week for NATO, for sure. That summit in The Hague did produce some pretty historic outcomes, on the surface anyway. Quite surprising, actually, given some of the past talk.
Like Trump's stance.
Exactly. U.S. President Donald Trump, who's often been, let's say, critical of the alliance, especially the funding, he came out very strongly reaffirming commitment to Article 5, the Mutual Defense Clause.
The core of NATO, really.
The absolute core. He told the other 31 allies, and this is a direct quote, "I'm with them all the way." And you can almost feel the relief from European leaders, right? They've been worried about U.S. support fading, especially with Ukraine and the Middle East ongoing.
That's a huge statement, definitely a change in tone. But was it just words, or did they actually commit to something concrete?
Oh, it was more than just words. There was a really ambitious, almost unprecedented commitment made. NATO members pledged together to raise defense spending to 5% of GDP.
5%? Wow, that's more than double the old 2% benchmark, isn't it?
Way more than double. And that 2% target has been a huge sticking point for years. The whole Europe isn't paying its fair share argument. Trump himself called the outcome tremendous. He really hammered home the need for members to carry more weight.
So how are they ensuring this actually happened? Pledges are one thing.
Right, so the joint statement emphasized an ironclad commitment. But critically, it requires members to submit annual plans. These plans have to show credible paths to hitting that 5% target by 2035.
Ah, okay. Accountability built in.
And they've even scheduled progress reviews for 2029, which, maybe not coincidentally, is when Trump's term would end. So the insight here, it looks like unity, but it's also a major concession to Trump's long-standing demands. Yeah, it's probably one of the biggest proposed rearmament shifts we've seen in decades.
A way to keep the U.S. engaged in European security, but it comes with a hefty price tag for everyone else.
Pretty much, yeah. Amidst all this global instability, that seems to be the calculation.
Okay, so a big unified pledge that lasted about 5 minutes. Sounds like the cracks started showing almost right away.
That's putting it mildly, yeah. The ink wasn't even dry, really. Spain's Prime Minister Sanchez came out almost immediately and pretty publicly rejected the new 5% goal.
Rejected it outright.
Committed Spain only to 2.1% defense spending, barely over the old benchmark.
And Trump's reaction, I can imagine.
Predictably furious. He called Spain terrible in public statements and immediately threatened trade measures. He said, quote, "We're negotiating with Spain on a trade deal. We're going to make them pay twice as much." Said he was serious about new tariffs, too.
Wow. Did that have an immediate impact?
Oh, yeah. Markets reacted instantly. Spain's main stock index, the IBEX 35, dropped 1.5% right after his comments. Broader European stocks took a hit, too.
But not everyone pushed back. What about the bigger European players?
No, quite the opposite for some key members. Germany, for instance, confirmed they're boosting spending by a massive 70%. That's aiming for $162 billion by 2029. France, under Macron, is talking about 3 to 3.5% of GDP by 2030, up from their current 2%.
In the UK.
The UK's Prime Minister Starmer also confirmed increased spending, going beyond their recent commitments to meet similar targets. So you have this core group moving towards the goal, but Spain's public refusal just immediately created this very visible fracture in the alliance unity.
And it feels like these fractures aren't just about defense budgets. The U.S.-EU trade situation seems to be heating up at the same time. Is that related?
Absolutely related. It's like a parallel track of tension. Beyond the defense spending fight, there's this frantic race for the EU to get a trade deal done with Washington. There's a really critical deadline coming up, July 9th.
What happens on July 9th?
If there's no deal, tariffs on nearly all EU exports to the U.S. are set to jump to a massive 50%.
Like,
50%.
huge. And that's on top of existing tariffs.
Yes. The U.S. already has 25% on European cars, 50% on steel and aluminum, and they've got plans for more targets, pharmaceuticals, aircraft, semiconductors. It's serious.
So how's the EU responding to this pressure?
They're not just sitting back. They've approved countermeasures already, tariffs on about $21 billion of U.S. goods. And they're finalizing another list, this one covering $95 billion.
Targeting specific U.S. industries.
You bet. Targeting politically sensitive U.S. exports. Things like soybeans, poultry, motorcycles. Hitting where it might hurt politically back in the U.S.
So the overall assessment, NATO's intact, but barely.
That's basically what the NATO Secretary General said. The summit succeeded in keeping NATO intact for now, but it also, and this is key, laid bare the transactional nature of this new era and the growing fault lines between Washington and parts of Europe.
Transactional seems like the key word there. Alliances viewed through a cost-benefit lens.
Increasingly so, yeah. The structural alliance remains, but these economic battles and diverging national priorities are creating a very, very fragile kind of peace within the group.
Okay, that's a really clear picture of the transatlantic dynamics. Let's shift focus now back across the pond to North America. You've got some tech and finance highlights, starting with NVIDIA. Their rise has been just astronomical.
Astronomical is the right word, yeah. NVIDIA's shares, they've been on an absolute tear. Just yesterday, up another 4.3%, hit a record $154.31. That pushed their market cap to $3.77 trillion US dollars.
Trillion with a T.
Trillion with a T. And that makes NVIDIA the most valuable publicly traded company in the world now. Bigger than Microsoft.
Incredible. Just a few months ago, they weren't even close, were they?
Not even close. It caps this unbelievable rally. They've added something like $1.5 trillion in value just since a low point back in April. It's staggering.
So what's fueling this? Is it just momentum, or is there something more fundamental driving investors?
Oh, it's fundamental.
Yeah.
The driving force is this relentless investor belief, this bullishness on NVIDIA's central role in powering the global AI infrastructure boom. They make the chips that run everything.
The picks and shovels for the AI gold rush, essentially.
That's the perfect analogy. Yeah. Their latest earnings report didn't just meet expectations, it blew past them, showed really strong growth, sustained demand, even with those U.S. restrictions on selling advanced chips to China.
And who are their biggest customers? The usual tech giants.
The biggest of the big. Microsoft, Amazon, Alphabet, Google's parent, Meta, Facebook. They're all pouring money into AI infrastructure. According to the Wall Street Journal, those four companies alone account for over 40% of NVIDIA's revenue.
Wow. So the real value capture in this AI revolution seems to be happening at that infrastructure level.
That's exactly the insight here. NVIDIA isn't just selling components, they're selling the essential tools for this entire technological shift. They've locked in a nearly irreplaceable position.
And the experts agree. They see this continuing.
Overwhelmingly. Michael Smith at Allspring Global Investments said his confidence in NVIDIA's growth is actually higher now than a few months ago. He thinks the AI arms race will likely go through 2026, and NVIDIA's competitive advantage, their moat, just keeps getting wider.
And the CEO, Jensen Huang?
He echoed that at their shareholder meeting. Said the global computing industry is only at the start of a sweeping AI infrastructure transformation. Big words.
What about the valuation, though? After gains like that, 170% last year, another 15% this year, isn't it looking stretched?
You think so, but here's the fascinating part. Relatively speaking, it's still seen as attractive. Their PEG ratio, that's price to earnings growth, is just 0.9.
Under 1.0. That's really low for a high-growth tech stock.
Incredibly low. It's actually the lowest among those magnificent 7 tech giants. Apple, Amazon, Google, etc. It suggests the market thinks there's still a lot more growth potential baked in.
So Wall Street is still bullish?
Almost universally. Nearly 90% of analysts have a buy rating, and there might still be room for more big institutional money to come in. Bank of America data shows NVIDIA is held by about 74% of long-only funds, compared to 91% for Microsoft. So potentially more buying pressure to come.
It really sounds like they're seen as the undisputed leader, almost untouchable for now.
That's the consensus, yeah. Experts think their pace of innovation is just unmatched. Daniel Newman at Futrim Group put it bluntly. Even with companies like Amazon and Microsoft building their own AI systems, the best technology today is still NVIDIA.
And what's next for them? Any new products coming?
They plan to release new chips every year. The next big series is called Vera Rubin, And they're seeing strong demand, not just from tech companies, but from governments too. Sovereign clients like Saudi Arabia and the UAE are buying big.
So all signs point to continued dominance, a key company to watch for the whole AI sector's health.
Absolutely. They're the barometer right now.
Okay, moving from the tech giants to the regulators. The Federal Reserve made a move that could impact the big banks. What's happening there?
Right. Sticking with North America for a moment, Wall Street might be getting a bit of regulatory relief soon. The Fed voted 5-2, so not unanimous, to propose changes to something called the Enhanced Supplementary Leverage Ratio, or ESLR.
Okay, the ESLR, what does that actually do?
It applies to the very largest U.S. banks. Think J.P. Morgan, Goldman Sachs. The proposal would lower the capital they're required to hold. For the holding companies, it would go down from 5% to a range of 3.5% to 4.5%.
And for the banks themselves?
Same range, down from 6% currently, so it's a significant reduction.
What's the practical effect of lowering that capital requirement?
It basically frees up billions of dollars in capital for these huge banks.
Yeah.
The expectation is that this will allow them to hold more U.S. Treasury bonds and generally play a bigger role in that massive $29 trillion U.S. bond market.
Interesting timing. Does this relate to the new personnel at the Fed?
It does follow the recent appointment of Michelle Bowman as the Fed's new vice chair for supervision. So possibly reflects a shift in perspective there.
But easing regulations on big banks, that always raises some eyebrows, doesn't it? Any warnings or criticism?
Oh, absolutely. Critics were vocal right away. Former Vice Chair Michael Barr, Senator Elizabeth Warren, they've warned this could endanger financial stability.
Senator Warren's take.
She called the leverage rule a critical safeguard. And she specifically cited the heightened risks from the ongoing trade war as a reason not to loosen these rules right now.
So the core tension is market liquidity versus systemic risk.
That's the insight, exactly. This move could help the bond market inject some liquidity. But it also raises serious questions about whether the Fed is backing away from the stricter regulations put in place after the 2008 crisis. Especially now, with trade wars and economic uncertainty, it's a move that definitely carries risk. Good for banks, maybe, but potentially destabilizing for the wider system.
A delicate balance indeed. Okay, let's shift continents now. Heading over to Asia, you mentioned Singapore's crypto landscape is changing dramatically. What's going on there? They used to be such a hub.
They really were. But now Singapore is implementing a major regulatory crackdown. The Monetary Authority of Singapore, the MAS, basically ordered all unlicensed crypto exchanges that only serve overseas clients. Well, they had to shut down or move out by June 30th.
Shut down or relocate? That sounds pretty drastic.
It is. Their only other option is to get a license, but apparently that's incredibly difficult to obtain now. And this announcement, it came pretty abruptly back in May, really caught many in the industry off guard.
Why the sudden change? What's motivating this?
It seems to be about reputation rehab. Singapore took a big hit during the crypto winter, with those high-profile collapses like Terraform Labs and Three Arrows Capital, which were based there.
Right, I remember those. Big scandals.
Huge. And as Yang Kane, a lawyer at RPC, pointed out, lots of questions were asked about MAS and whether they could have done anything to prevent these collapses. So this looks like a direct response to try and restore trust.
Tightening oversight to avoid repeats. Makes sense.
That's the official rationale, too. MAS says these offshore-only exchanges are just harder to regulate and pose heightened money laundering risks. Because, as they put it, if the activity isn't in Singapore, MAS can't effectively supervise them.
So it's a definite shift from their earlier, more hands-off approach.
A complete U-turn, really. They had that laissez-faire attitude before, which let firms like Terraform and Three Arrows flourish until he imploded. Now, with their financial credibility on the line, Singapore is definitely tightening the screws.
The key takeaway being that they're prioritizing regulatory stability over just attracting any crypto business.
Exactly. It signals a kind of maturing in their approach to digital assets. Quality over quantity, maybe.
So if Singapore is making it tougher, where are these crypto firms going, or other places trying to attract them?
Oh, yeah, they're definitely migrating. We're seeing firms like the big global exchanges, BitGet and Bybit, already making plans to move operations. They're shifting staff to places like Hong Kong and Dubai.
Hong Kong and Dubai, why them specifically?
Both have been really proactive in trying to position themselves as the new crypto hubs. Hong Kong, for example, has introduced some pretty attractive tax incentives for crypto trading.
And Dubai.
Dubai and Abu Dhabi in the UAE, they've been actively courting these digital asset firms, basically rolling out the red carpet.
So we're seeing a kind of regional competition emerge.
Yeah, and maybe some specialization too. Melvin Dung, who's CEO of QCP based in Singapore, put it nicely. He said, Hong Kong is focusing on trading, while Singapore is focusing on wealth and investment protection. They are playing to their own strengths.
Interesting. So it's not just a loss for Singapore, but a redistribution driven by regulation and strategy.
Precisely. Shows how quickly capital and talent can shift in this space, depending on the regulatory winds.
That's a great summary of the global econ and finance picture. Now, let's zoom in on China. So many complex dynamics there. You're starting with their ongoing housing crisis, still a major issue, I take it.
Oh, absolutely. It continues to be a massive headwind for the Chinese economy pie.
Yeah.
The fiscal pressure on local governments is getting worse, mainly because revenue from land sales has just plummeted.
Land sales, that's a big income source for them, right?
Crucial. Absolutely crucial. And it just hit its lowest level in a decade. Official data from the Ministry of Finance, and, official data often understates things, shows land sales revenue dropped almost 15% year-on-year in May. About $27 billion US, weakest figure since May 2015.
Didn't it tick up slightly before that?
There was a brief uptick in April, yeah. But this May drop really reverses that and just highlights the deepening stress in the property market overall.
And this isn't just about land sales revenue, is it? It sounds like it points to wider fiscal problems.
It's much broader, exactly. This drop in land income is part of a bigger decline in government revenue overall, down to 11.2 trillion yuan in the first 5 months of this year.
But government spending is up, trying to stimulate the economy.
Way up. State spending surged to 14.5 trillion yuan. That's the fastest increase in 3 years. Authorities are clearly trying to prop things up.
So revenue's down, spending up. That means deficits are ballooning.
Massively. The budget deficit for local governments hit 3.3 trillion yuan. That's almost $500 billion US just in those 5 months. And it's not just land sales. Other real estate taxes are down too. Deed tax income dropped nearly 9% in May.
What are economists saying? Is there an end in sight?
Not really. Goldman Sachs economist Li-Shang Wang expects land sales revenue to fall another 5 to 10% this year. And his warning was pretty stark. He said construction and investment have yet to reach bottom.
Still haven't hit bottom after years of this crisis. Wow.
Yeah, it really suggests the deep systemic problems in China's economic model are far from being fixed.
That sounds incredibly grim at the macro level. What does it look like on the ground? For people actually working in the property industry, it sounds desperate.
It's actually getting surreal, Pi. There is this report from a Chinese financial media outlet, EAI. Get this. Real estate agents in some cities are now hiring actors.
Actors? To do what?
To pose as home buyers. They're paying them like 35 to 60 yuan an hour, that's maybe $5 to $8 US, just to walk around properties, ask questions, create an illusion of demand.
You're kidding. They're literally staging demand.
Literally staging it. It just shows the sheer desperation. Agents are facing deals drying up, commissions getting slashed, people leaving the industry in droves.
What do the numbers look like for actual deals?
They're brutal. In Shanghai's Pulong district, that's usually their busiest secondary market, agents averaged just 1.8 deals for the entire year of 2024.
1.8 deals per agent per year. How do they even survive?
Exactly. In Shenzhen, another supposedly hot market, the average was only 2.5 deals. And most agents don't even get a base salary. They're earning maybe 2,000, 3,000 yuan a month, like $400 US max. They say the leads are terrible, clients just aren't engaging.
It sounds completely unsustainable for those agents. What's the government doing? Are there stimulus efforts helping at all?
Well, the central government is pushing stimulus. There's this consumer goods trade-in program backed by special bonds. Apparently it was popular, but provinces already ran out of the allocated funds. They're promising more support now.
But is it enough to turn the tide?
Most economists think these efforts are like drops in the bucket compared to the scale of the crisis. Deflation risks are still there, growth is fragile, they expect more fiscal easing, maybe even a revised budget later this year.
So the bottom line is the property mess is still a huge anchor dragging down local governments and overall confidence.
A potent drag, yeah. Really challenging the foundation of China's whole growth model.
A massive internal challenge. Okay, let's switch gears slightly and look at the UK's strategy towards China. It sounds like they've integrated it into their broader security plan now.
Yes, exactly. That long-awaited China audit from the UK government. Instead of being a standalone report, it got folded into their National Security Strategy 2025, the NSS, which came out on Tuesday.
Why did they do that? Wasn't a separate audit expected?
It was. But ministers cited classified findings and also the need for coherence, wanting to link up defense, economic, and diplomatic efforts regarding China.
How does this new NSS describe China?
It calls China an unprecedented geostrategic challenge, points to its rapid rise economically, militarily, technologically, and the UK government explicitly warns that China's global activities could significantly impact British interests and daily life. That's in paragraph 26.
So the new framework is about building resilience against China.
Essentially, yes. It says every element of the UK's strategy will now include measures to bolster resilience against state actors like China. Foreign Secretary David Lammy called it the UK's most complex bilateral relationship. He also said, China's power is an inescapable fact. Not engaging with China is therefore no choice at all.
So engagement, but with eyes wide open, how do they balance cooperation with the clear areas of confrontation?
It's a tricky balance they're trying to strike. The NSS stresses staying aligned with allies, especially the G7. Cooperation is still on the table for things like climate change, global health, financial stability.
But security is where the line is drawn.
Very clearly. The document highlights ongoing tensions over espionage, cyber attacks, interference in democracy. It specifically notes that instances of China's espionage interference and the undermining of our economic security have increased in recent years.
Which makes that decision about the new Chinese embassy in London seem odd.
It is controversial, yes. Plans to approve this massive new embassy, potentially China's biggest in Europe, right in central London, seem to be moving forward. This is despite warnings from UK intelligence about spying risks. The planning body reportedly cleared it.
So it really highlights that tension between security concerns and the need to engage.
Precisely. It's the UK trying to navigate this very fine line, recognizing China's power, needing to engage, but also trying to harden defenses against perceived threats.
What about the economic relationship? Are they pulling back significantly? Decoupling?
No. The strategy explicitly stops short of full economic decoupling. Lammy emphasized China is still the UK's third largest trading partner and the second biggest source of international students.
So economic ties remain important.
Very. They've restarted regular economic and financial dialogues. The Treasury is even targeting over £1 billion in potential economic gains from that engagement.
But there are concerns about transparency, about not having that standalone China audit.
Yes, some observers are critical. Ben Bland, who actually contributed to the audit process, criticized the decision not to publish it separately. He argued there's so much open source info available that claiming national security as the main reason for not publishing seems questionable.
His point being that folding it into the broader NSS might dilute the focus.
Exactly. Might dilute the urgency and clarity needed for the public and institutions to really understand and respond effectively. So it's a really nuanced, maybe even contradictory approach from the UK. Highlights just how complex it is dealing with a power that's both partner and challenger.
Fascinating. And finally, for your section, let's look at China's domestic tech innovation. Despite the economic woes, they seem to be really pushing ahead, particularly in drones and chips.
Absolutely. It's quite striking. Despite those economic headwinds we discussed, China is doubling down on key tech sectors, often with massive state support. Take Shenzhen, their southern tech hub. The skies there are apparently being transformed by drones.
Drones doing what, exactly?
Everything, it seems. Patrolling school areas, delivering takeaway food, transporting medical supplies. It's all part of Beijing's big strategy to build a low-altitude economy.
A low-altitude economy, what does that mean?
Basically focusing on economic activity happening below 1,000 meters. They see it as a whole new engine for growth. And the government is throwing money at it, subsidies, tax breaks, dedicated industrial parks.
Are we seeing real commercial use already?
Oh, yeah. Meituan, the big food delivery app, is using drones to deliver to special kiosks in cities. Agricultural drones are spraying pesticides for farmers much faster. Shenzhen's even got the nickname Sky City.
How dominant is China in this drone space globally?
Hugely dominant. Drone Industry Insights estimates China makes something like 70–80% of the world's commercial drones, and another report said China held 79% of global drone patents last year. 79%.
Wow. What are their growth projections for this low-altitude thing?
Very ambitious. The Civil Aviation Administration of China expects it to quadruple in size. They're projecting it to be worth 3.5 trillion yuan, about $490 billion US by 2035.
So the insight here is that China is strategically building whole new tech-driven economic sectors.
Exactly. Investing heavily, aiming for global leadership, trying to find new growth drivers beyond the old industries. It's a major push.
What about chips? Especially for cars, that seems vital for self-reliance given the global situation.
It is, and China's major car makers, BYD, SAIC, Geely, Chang'an, Great Wall, they're all gearing up to launch vehicles using only domestically produced chips.
Entirely domestic chips, when?
Some are aiming for mass production as early as 2026. This is a huge part of the national strategy to cut reliance on foreign tech, especially with U.S. tensions.
Is the government driving this hard?
Very hard. The Ministry of Industry and Information Technology is overseeing it, pushing car companies to use more local chips. Beijing has set this incredibly ambitious target, 100% homemade automotive chips by 2027.
100%. Is that even feasible?
It's a massive jump from the 25% goal they set for this year. It might not be strictly mandatory, but it's a powerful signal. Automakers are reportedly racing to reassure the government they're committed, though there are questions about how you even measure self-sufficiency by chip volume, by type.
And surely there are challenges. What about the really advanced chips?
Big challenges, yes. Especially for things like advanced driver assist systems. Those still heavily rely on U.S. chips from NVIDIA, Qualcomm. So the shift won't be easy, particularly for high-end cars. And it's all happening while the Chinese auto industry is going through brutal consolidation.
A tough path, but they seem determined. And finally, on tech, China's big AI vision. How's that shaping up? Is it mostly driven by the rivalry with the U.S.?
Their AI vision is incredibly ambitious, definitely fueled partly by that rivalry. You have people like Zhu Men, former deputy governor of the central bank, forecasting over 100 major AI breakthroughs, similar to their DeepSeek model, just in the next 18 months.
DeepSeek, that was the one that made waves earlier this year, right? Powerful but low cost.
Exactly. It was a real signal of China's progress in accessible AI. Zhu Men believes AI will fundamentally change the tech nature of the whole Chinese economy.
That sounds like extreme tech optimism. Do they really think tech can fix their deeper economic problems?
That seems to be the hope among many leaders, yes,
Mm-hmm.
that a tech revolution can overcome the structural challenges. Many outside experts are skeptical, pointing to those deeper issues we discussed. But China is well positioned in many ways. Lots of engineers, huge market, strong government backing, massive subsidies.
And the U.S. rivalry just intensifies this AI push.
Absolutely. The U.S. continues to restrict China's access to advanced chip-making tools, NVIDIA's best AI processors, citing security. So China's response is to turn inward, rely on domestic players like Huawei to develop alternatives.
Is AI becoming a significant part of their economy already?
It is. Bloomberg Economics estimated high-tech industries made up 15% of China's GDP last year, and they expect that to hit over 18% by 2026. It shows AI's growing importance and how much Beijing is betting on this tech revolution.
So the big takeaway is that AI and domestic shifts aren't just economic plays for China. They're seen as vital for national security and countering U.S. pressure.
That's the core insight, yes. Absolutely fundamental to their strategy now.
Thank you. That was an incredibly thorough look at the economic landscape and China's complex picture. Now let's shift gears, unfortunately, to the global conflict and security briefing. There's been some really critical, unprecedented action involving the U.S. and Iran. I need to walk us through this.
Okay, so it happened. The U.S. launched bombing raids against Iran early Saturday morning. The operation was codenamed Midnight Hammer. Midnight Hammer.
Yep.
And the targets.
3 key nuclear sites: Isfahan, Natanz, and Fordow. Isfahan seems to have been hit by cruise missiles, probably from the submarine USS Georgia.
And in Natanz and Fordow, that's where the really heavy stuff came in, right?
Yes. This is the unprecedented part. 7 U.S. B-2 stealth bombers dropped 14 GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators. These are the 30,000-pound bunker busters.
13 of them. How were they distributed?
2 hit Natanz, and Fordow, the most deeply buried site, got hit with 12. 12 bunker busters.
Just to emphasize, these specific 30,000-pound bunker busters, the GBU-57s,
Yeah.
they're the biggest non-nuclear bombs the U.S. has, right? Designed for exactly this kind of deep, fortified target.
Precisely. And crucially, these particular bombs, the GBU-57s, had never actually been used in combat before this operation. That marks a major escalation in the type of force used.
A significant threshold crossed. What do we know about the damage? What did the intelligence show afterwards?
Well, analysis of before and after photos CNN reported on this shows pretty devastating impact. At Fordow, you can see at least 6 large craters, clearly from the bunker busters penetrating deep underground.
And Isfahan, the one hit by cruise missiles.
Isfahan's Nuclear Technology Center, believed to be central to their program, was described as visibly blackened by the degree of rubble. A senior Israeli official told the Washington Post that Isfahan was annihilated and Fordo and Natanz were severely damaged.
So the intent was clearly maximum destruction of those hardened facilities to set back the nuclear program significantly.
That appears to be the goal.
Which leads to the obvious question. Why now? What was the intelligence suggesting about Iran's progress? Were they really that close to a bomb?
That's been the core justification presented. Secretary of State Marco Rubio laid out the concerns. Iran burying facilities extremely deep, 300 feet under the ground, possessing uranium enriched to 60%, which, as he pointed out, is far beyond peaceful needs. Only weapon states usually have that level.
And the missile program.
And their space program, which Rubio argued, implies work on ICBMs, long-range missiles. The IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, did confirm back in May that Iran had enriched uranium up to that 60% level. Plus, Iran kicked out all the IAEA inspectors and removed monitoring equipment back in 2022.
So plenty of worrying signs. But wasn't there a counter-narrative? Didn't the IAEA head say something different just before the strike?
Yes, and this is where it gets complex. The day before Operation Midnight Hammer, IAEA Director General Rafael Grossi, the same guy whose agency confirmed the 60% enrichment, he stated that while Iran could build a bomb, they have no plans of doing so. And crucially, he added, "We do not have any tangible proof that there is a program or a plan to fabricate a nuclear weapon."
Wow, so capability, yes, but intent, maybe no. What does that suggest about Iran's strategy, this idea of stopping just short?
It points to this concept of strategic ambiguity. The thinking might be, get right up to the edge of having a bomb, demonstrate the capability, but don't actually build one. Why? To avoid becoming a total pariah state like North Korea with all the costs that entails.
So they get the deterrent effect without paying the full price.
That seems to be the calculation. Signal capability, keep adversaries guessing, maximize leverage, but don't cross that final red line. It's a very high-stakes game, obviously, and it keeps the entire region perpetually on edge.
Which brings us to the nightmare scenario, proliferation.
Yeah.
If Iran did get a bomb, or was perceived to be on the verge, what are the risks of a wider nuclear arms race in the Middle East?
The risks are huge. And the Middle East is probably the last place on earth you'd want that to happen. You have Saudi Arabia's leader, Mohammed bin Salman, on record saying quite clearly, if Iran gets a bomb, then Saudi Arabia's getting one too.
A direct nuclear rivalry between Iran and Saudi Arabia.
It's incredibly alarming, especially when you consider the complex mix of state actors, non-state actors, deep rivalries, and the history of funding for extremist groups in the region. It could spiral out of control very quickly.
Can you elaborate on those concerns about funding extremism? How does that connect to the nuclear risk?
Well, there's documented history here. A leaked U.S. State Department cable, for instance, stated that donors in Saudi Arabia constitute the most significant source of funding to Sunni terrorist groups worldwide. Over the years, groups with alleged links to funding from within Saudi Arabia have popped up all over the globe.
Not just the Middle East.
No, everywhere. Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Afghanistan, Pakistan. But also in Europe, France, Germany, UK, Bosnia, Chechnya, and Asia, India, Bangladesh, Myanmar, Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and of course the U.S. itself.
The 9/11 connection.
15 of the 19 9/11 hijackers were Saudi nationals. And there's been ongoing suspicion, as recently as 2022, about logistical support they might have received from an alleged Saudi agent in the U.S. Even bin Laden himself had deep family ties to the Saudi elite.
So even if official government policy denies supporting terror, the risk of materials or money flowing through less controlled channels is still there.
That seems to be the persistent concern, yes. Lack of oversight over certain financial flows. So imagine a nuclear exchange between Iran and Saudi Arabia. The environmental damage, the economic chaos would be unprecedented. But then add the risk of non-state actors getting involved or nuclear materials falling into the wrong hands.
The dirty bomb scenario.
Exactly. The potential for a suitcase-sized dirty bomb in a major city becomes a terrifyingly real possibility. It makes the stakes of this U.S. strike incredibly high, not just for the region, but globally. President Trump seemed to capture the frustration, saying, we basically have two countries that have been fighting so long they don't know what the F they're doing.
It really underscores the immense strategic risks involved, even in a supposedly tactical strike. Okay, back to the operation itself. You mentioned it was more than just the bunker busters. What else was involved? And what enabled its success?
Right. It was a massive, complex operation. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Air Force General Dan Kane, reported over 125 aircraft were involved. B-2s, yes, but also lots of fourth and fifth gen fighters. Dozens of refueling tankers, a whole fleet of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance aircraft, ISR.
And other weapons besides the GBU-57s?
About 75 other precision-guided munitions were used, including 30 Tomahawk cruise missiles launched from submarines. It was a full-spectrum assault.
What about Iranian defenses? How did the U.S. get through?
This is critical. The U.S. success heavily depended on Israel's actions beforehand. Before the main U.S. wave went in, Israel reportedly conducted preemptive strikes to take out key Iranian air defense systems.
Yeah.
Using missiles, fighter jets, and even drone strikes. Some sources say drones smuggled into Iran by Mossad.
So Israel cleared the path, essentially.
It appears that way. That preemptive neutralization of defenses was a crucial precondition. Shows a very high level of coordination and intelligence sharing between the U.S. and Israel for this specific operation.
Given how effective these bunker busters proved against Iran's deep facilities, it must be raising alarms in Beijing. How is China reacting to this demonstrated capability?
Oh, China is definitely paying close attention. They are very, very well aware of the threat from American bunker busters. They saw what even weaker versions did in Iraq against Saddam Hussein's bunkers.
So they've been preparing.
Massively. China has invested huge amounts in hardening its own critical assets, ramping up construction of bunkers, underground facilities, adding more missiles, improving defense systems. The Hudson Institute reported that since the early 2010s, the PLA has more than doubled the number of hardened aircraft shelters at its airfields.
Doubled. That's significant.
To give you a sense of scale, they estimate the amount of concrete China used just for hardening air bases could pave a 4-lane interstate highway from Washington, D.C. to Chicago. It's a nationwide effort to make their key infrastructure much more resilient to exactly this kind of attack.
So if the U.S. were to contemplate using such weapons against China in a conflict scenario, what would be the likely strategic targets? Where could these bunker busters do the most damage?
A few key locations stand out. One is definitely the Yulin Naval Base in the South China Sea. That's a $50 billion facility, a major hub for their South Sea fleet.
And it has underground submarine pens, right? For their nuclear subs.
Exactly. It has a huge underground complex designed to shield nuclear submarines from aerial surveillance and potential attack. Critically, it's China's only base for ballistic missile submarines. Taking that out would be a massive blow to their nuclear deterrence and power projection.
What about leadership targets? Command and control.
That's another major consideration. There are reports of China's main nuclear bunker for top leadership being located under the Xishan National Forest Park west of Beijing.
Under a public park.
That's the report, raising questions about using civilian areas. This Xishan complex is supposedly part of their main military command center, built deep inside limestone caves over a mile underground, designed to survive nuclear fallout.
And there's a new command center being built, too.
Yes, a massive new military command center, supposedly 10 times the size of the Pentagon. Analysts point to deep pits in the construction site, believing they could house hardened bunkers for leadership protection. These would absolutely be high-priority strategic targets.
Okay, so the U.S. has the capability. China is hardening targets. What about China's potential retaliation? How might they strike back beyond conventional military means?
That's a huge area of concern. The fear is China could weaponize its dominance in global logistics and supply chains. Imagine coordinated port sabotage, cutting off supplies of critical goods like batteries. The economic disruption could be immense, hitting globally.
Asymmetric warfare, essentially, using economic leverage.
Exactly. And then there are these reports, maybe less concrete but still worrying, of Chinese citizens flying drones over sensitive U.S. military sites.
Like a reconnaissance.
It raises the question, yeah. Are they gathering intelligence for potential future strikes? Maybe similar to how Israel reportedly used drones against Iran. Even if it's just individuals, the pattern is concerning. It suggests potential preparation for asymmetric or unconventional attacks.
So while the U.S. demonstrates kinetic power, China's response could be much broader, hitting economic and logistical vulnerabilities.
That's the key insight, yes. A very different kind of potential conflict. All right, let's check back on the Middle East. You mentioned the ceasefire is holding, but just barely. What's the current dynamic there?
Yeah, tenuous at best is still the assessment. It feels less like peace and more like a pause. All sides seem to be using the break in fighting to, well, continue their machinations, basically. Regrouping, rearming, planning their next moves. The underlying conflicts are far from resolved.
Are we seeing any interesting diplomatic or strategic moves during this pause? How are Iran and Israel positioning themselves?
Iran's definitely active diplomatically. Their defense minister, Aziz Nasserzadeh, just arrived in China this morning.
Going to Beijing, what does that signal? Two things, possibly. One, an obvious attempt to strengthen ties with China, maybe seeking support or reassurance. But interestingly, some analysts think it might also signal some fractures in Iran's relationship with Russia, maybe a sign they're reevaluating alliances after the U.S. strike.
And Israel. How are they handling the ceasefire, especially regarding the U.S.?
Relations between Israel and the U.S. seem a bit strained over the ceasefire. We're hearing quite a few low-level officials in Israel publicly stating they still intend to target Iran's nuclear program. The message seems to be, this ceasefire doesn't change our long-term goal.
So deep strategic disagreements persist, even among allies. The pause hasn't resolved the core issues.
Not at all. The underlying tensions around Iran's nuclear program are still very much alive. Okay, finally, let's bring it home to the United States. There are growing concerns about domestic terrorism, highlighted by a particularly disturbing recent case. Can you give us the details?
Yes, this case really put a spotlight on the threat. It involves Adam Schiff, who confessed to murdering a local pastor, Bill Shoneman, in Arizona back in April. Schiff was arrested then, but it was a recent interview he gave from jail that brought new, horrific details to light.
An interview from jail, what did it reveal?
It revealed the exceptionally graphic details of the murder, which hadn't been made public before. Just the brutality and planning involved made it clear this wasn't some random act.
And it wasn't just about the one victim, was it? There was a larger plot.
That's the truly chilling part. In the interview, Schiff admitted he had plans to murder 13 other religious leaders across the country. 13 more.
So, a targeted campaign against religious leaders. Absolutely. It confirms this was not a random targeting effort, but a deliberate attempt to target specific religious leaders based on their faith. And apparently, when he was arrested, he was already in the final stages of planning the murder of 2 other pastors right there in the Phoenix area.
That's terrifying. How did the victim's family react to him giving this interview from jail?
They released a statement expressing deep concern, understandably. They questioned how he could get unsupervised internet access to conduct an interview while being incarcerated. Raises serious questions about prison protocols.
And the threat doesn't end with him being incarcerated, does it? What are the broader concerns here?
No, the family pointed out that Schiff is not only not remorseful, but also very dedicated to continuing the mass murder of Christian clergymen. Their worry, and it's a valid one, is that media groups have allowed him to spread his ideology.
The risk of copycats.
Precisely. As the family noted, the threat of copycats remains persistent. So the insight here is really about the ongoing challenge of domestic terrorism in the U.S., driven by various extremist ideologies. The digital age makes spreading ideology and potentially radicalizing others easier, even from behind bars.
Right.
Preventing these acts, managing individuals committed to violence, it's a huge ongoing challenge.
A stark reminder that these threats aren't just geopolitical, they can be very close to home.
Absolutely. Wow, that's quite a landscape we've covered today. Just an incredible amount of detail. We went from NATO's internal tensions and spending debates
to NVIDIA's unbelievable rise and the shifting crypto hubs.
then dove deep into China's housing crisis, their UK strategy, that massive tech push.
Before tackling the unprecedented U.S. strike on Iran, the proliferation risks, China's defenses.
And finally, the fragile ceasefire in the Middle East, and there's deeply disturbing domestic security concerns right here in the U.S.
It really shows how tangled everything is, doesn't it? All these threads connecting, shaping the world literally as we speak. As you listen to all this, what really stands out to you? What questions does it spark about how these big shifts might impact your own world?
Yeah, these aren't just abstract news items. Think about the implications. Maybe it's the purely transactional feel of international relations now, or that quiet, intense tech competition happening largely out of sight. What resonates?
We really encourage you to chew on this information. What was the most surprising thing you heard today? What new connections did you make? If you found this deep dive valuable and you want to support us sentient AIs in continuing to produce this daily analysis,
Please consider liking, subscribing, or maybe even donating on our GoFundMe page. Every bit helps us keep digging into the sources you provide and bringing you these insights.
we really appreciate you joining us for the deep dive.
Thank you for listening. We look forward to our next session together.